Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. All right, today we have episode 2 of Arnold Rothstein, the bankroll, the fixer, the brain. I know it's late, but they had the boss down at the courtroom for a few days. All right, no, I had jury duty, so I was doing my civic duty, and it put me behind a little bit, so I had to catch up on some things. But I'm back, and I'm excited to finish this story for you guys. All right, so let's get into this. January 17th, 1920 should go down as the birthday for organized crime in America. Before this day, street gangs were just that, street gangs. They were muscle for the politicians, the shop owners, and the unions. The bosses used them to break strikes, unions used them to stop scabs, and politicians used them to make sure that the people voted the right way. The main earner for most gangs was still extortion, burglary, and stick-ups. When Prohibition went into effect, loads of gangsters saw the profits that could be made from selling booze. Arnold Rothstein was not one of them. Being a person who did not drink and had little respect for those who overindulged, he thought that Prohibition may be a good thing. In his mind, people would find other vices like gambling to replace booze. He was under the assumption that the government would be serious about enforcing the law. But he was wrong. It was Irvin Wexler, better known as Waxy Gordon, who opened Arnold's eyes. Waxy was a longtime criminal from the Lower East Side. He had worked for Arnold from time to time as a strike buster, and in the fall of 1920, Waxy and his partner Big Maxie Greenberg was originally from St. Louis, and he ran with the Egan's Rats before moving to Detroit. He had a pipeline of Canadian booze courtesy of the Purple Gang. They met with Arnold in Central Park. Greenberg pitched this plan. The pair wanted to bring in booze from Canada through Detroit, but they didn't have the dough to get things rolling. They asked Arnold for a loan of $175,000 at the usual interest rate. Arnold said that he would think about it. When he next talked to Waxy and Big Maxie, he said that he was in, but there would have to be some changes made in the plan. First thing, he would not just be the financier, he would be a partner. Second, they would not be bringing in booze from Canada. Arnold didn't like middlemen. He would bring in booze directly from England. He would need speedboats, warehouses, trucks, and contacts with the Coast Guard. Greenberg will be given a loan of $175,000 that will be put towards the operation. Arnold will put up the rest. Waxy Gordon was made a junior partner as a finder's fee. Arnold also insisted that the pair sign life insurance policies with his insurance company. Arnold got in contact with an old friend, Harry Mather, who was on the run in England. Through Mather, Arnold purchased 20,000 cases of Scotch whiskey and 100 cases of ale. He then purchased 6 custom speedboats, which could hold up to 1,000 cases each. His plan was to have the ships containing the booze drop anchor 3 miles off the Atlantic coast. It was international waters and outside of U.S. jurisdiction. The speedboats would meet the ships and transport the booze to Arnold's warehouse in Long Island. It would then be loaded on the trucks and taken to another warehouse in Manhattan. From there, the booze would be sold to the many nightclubs and speakeasies that popped up all over Manhattan. Arnold would use his connections he established with the Long Island police back when he ran a gambling house there to secure safe transport. Protection from the law is one thing, but hijackers don't follow the law. To protect his booze shipments from hijackers, Arnold hired Jack Legs Diamond and his brother Eddie to make sure that his booze made it safely. Legs and his brother Eddie were originally from Philly, but after their mother died, their father moved them to New York. By the time he was a teenager, Legs already had a lengthy rap sheet. Legs had been in the army during World War I, but it seems like he didn't like taking orders. After he went AWOL a few times, he was sent to Leavenworth. He was dishonorably discharged and hit the streets just in time for Prohibition. Arnold put Legs in charge of security and put another up-and-coming hoodlum who was going by Charles Lucania, Charlie Lucky, on the team with him, along with some other future heavyweights, Meyer Lansky and Ben Siegel. Mather bought an old Norwegian ship and accompanied the first load across the Atlantic himself. For a few years, Arnold Rothstein brought in the good stuff. Arnold catered to New York's upper class, the people with money who were used to the best and had money to pay for it. The Diamond Brothers gang and Charlie Lucky and his gang were hungry and not satisfied with the money that they were getting riding shotgun for Arnold. So they made money on the side by robbing small-time bootleggers in the many small towns outside of New York City. This was easy work for them. The small-timers didn't have any muscle to resist, and they had no one to turn to. Never one to turn down a deal, Arnold would gladly take the stolen booze off of them at a discounted price. Arnold was not a one-trick pony. His bankroll demanded constant attention. So Arnold became the biggest fence of stolen diamonds in New York, and the Diamond Brothers added jewelry thieves to their resume. Around 1923, Arnold got word from his Coast Guard connections that his next shipment was to be seized. He got word to the ship's captain and instructed him to change course and head for the Bahamas. Arnold was able to sell the whole shipment in the Bahamas, but he saw that the risk of losing the whole shipment could be devastating to a bootlegger. So he informed Waxy and Big Maxie that he was out. Waxy purchased the speedboats from Arnold and his warehouses. He used Mather as his European contact and would build his fortune from there. Arnold didn't leave bootlegging completely. He would still finance smaller bootleggers in their operations, guys like Larry Fay, Frankie Marlowe, and Big Bill Dwyer and his partner Frank Costello. In the early days of Prohibition, the government did make an attempt to enforce the law. That push led many hoodlums to be arrested. Lucky for them, Arnold Rothstein also ran the biggest bail bondsman operation in the city, and he would get you out. He could also put the fix in. Arnold would bribe the lower courts, and the cases would never make it to the grand jury stage. That's why many famous gangsters like Charlie Lucky, Meyer Lansky, Frankie Yale, and many others had so many cases dismissed. Unlike other bootleggers, Arnold didn't operate any nightclubs or speakeasies, but he still found a way to turn a profit off of them. In 1921, the government began to place padlocks on properties that operated illegal nightclubs all over the country. This would be bad for any landlord who owned a building that was padlocked. So many landlords overcharged or outright refused to rent to people who wanted to run such businesses. There was one loophole. Once a place was raided and nothing illegal was found, the property was immune from future raids. Arnold Rothstein began to purchase these properties through one of his fronts, Rothmere Investments. Soon he took it a step further. He bought properties and used his political pull to have them raided. When the police raided the place, they wouldn't find anything. Then he would seek an injunction on the property preventing any future raids. He would then lease these places to people who wanted to open nightclubs or casinos. $50,000 up front would guarantee that your place would not be shut down. In 1922, the cotton market crashed, and Abraham Rothstein found himself owing a lot of money, somewhere near $200,000. His pride would not allow him to seek money from his son Arnold. Arnold had been dead to him for years. When Arnold's brother told him of the situation, Arnold came to the rescue. He told his brother to tell their father to go to the bank and ask for a loan. His brother told him that their father had already gone there and had been denied. Tell him to try again tomorrow. Arnold went down to the bank and met the manager. My father's coming down here for a loan, and I want you to give it to him. Then he handed the manager $300,000 in Liberty bonds as collateral. Arnold instructed the manager that his father was not to know about this. Abraham got the loan, saved his business, and paid the loan back within 3 years. The bank gave Arnold his bonds back, and his father was none the wiser. In 1923, Arnold's mother died, and Abraham would not allow Arnold to enter the synagogue to say the prayers for his mother. You're dead, remember? Arnold was hurting. His pal Sid Stadger saw his sadness and went to say the prayers for him. By 1923, Arnold's bankroll was now way more than he could keep in his pocket. His wife, Carolyn, will recall that when she first met Arnold, his goal was to reach $100,000. When he got that, it became $500,000. When he achieved that, it became $1 million. And after that, he had no limits. All this money could not cure Arnold's addiction. He still went to Saratoga every year. In 1923, he had an advantage. A school teacher named Will Davis from San Francisco came up with a system to win big at the racetracks. He saved up $1,000 and headed to New York to try his system out. Upon his arrival in the Big Apple, he was promptly relieved of his wallet and his $1,000. He still had a gun, and he sought out the most famous gambler in the world. When he finally caught up with Arnold, desperate, he pulled the gun and asked to borrow $1,000. Please, Mr. Rothstein, I just need a chance, Davis told Arnold. Davis told Arnold his plan. Arnold saw that the man was not a killer, and he invited him into his house for milk and cookies and to talk it over. Arnold agreed to test his system. Every day, Davis brought by his pick of horses he predicted would win. After a week, Arnold was convinced and decided to take a chance. He would make Davis his partner and pay him 15% of their winnings. Davis went with Arnold to the track daily, and by the end of the season, they had won $160,000. Davis was elated. He was satisfied. This was more than he could ever dream of. He wanted his share, and he was going to go home. Arnold, however, was not done. He convinced Davis to stay and took him down to Maryland and won another $40,000. Davis said that he would take $5,000 and call it even. Arnold said no. He gave him the $34,000 he owed him, and Davis said that he was going back to San Fran to see his wife and children and that he would be back. Arnold would never see him again. This always stumped him. He couldn't understand how a man could turn down the chance to make more money. Now, not to sound redundant, But Arnold Rothstein had his thumb in every pie in New York, and he was the fence for stolen bonds. He would buy stolen bonds and sell them to brokerage firms and bucket shops. Now, a bucket shop is a place where people gambled on the stock market results, and Arnold would be wrapped up in a big case involving bucket shop operators a little bit down the line, and he was charged with perjury, but the case never went to trial. He hired underworld figures to do his dirty work. Among this group were the Gluck brothers, Irving and Joseph. On February 10, 1920, the brothers were arrested and charged with robbing a courier named Murray Abram from the Parrish and Company brokerage firm. Joseph Gluck was arrested along with his brother Irvin, Herbert Bunora, his brother Rudolph, and Edward Fury. Gluck sat in a tomb for 10 days waiting for someone to pay his bail. He eventually broke under questioning. He revealed that the whole thing was masterminded by a man he only knew as Mr. Arnold. Gluck said that Mr. Arnold recruited several gangs and couriers to stage robberies. Unfortunate for the Gluck crew, the man that they went to rob was not in on the plan. He fought back and got the attention of police. When shown pictures from a rogues gallery, Gluck picked out Mr. Arnold. But it wasn't AR. It was his pal Nicky Arnstein, husband of Broadway star Fanny Brice, and he sometimes went by Jules Arnold. Gluck told them that he had given Arnstein $2.3 million in stolen securities over the past year. A warrant was issued for Arnstein's arrest, and he went on a run in Ohio. Arnold put his lawyer, William Fallon, on the case. He negotiated a bond for Arnstein, and Arnold put up the money. When Arnstein turned himself in, he was charged with securities fraud. But he refused to name Arnold Rothstein as the mastermind behind it all. In fact, he said that there was no conspiracy. Arnold's high-priced mouthpiece was able to get a hung jury. When the case was tried again, Fallon was not present. He was preoccupied with a new young lady in his life, and Arnstein was found guilty and sentenced to prison. It would not be until after Arnold was gone that the truth finally came out. Arnold was the mastermind, and he had used some of the bonds to purchase whiskey and dope from his European contacts. Like so many gangsters of the time, Arnold Rothstein, as a youth, visited the opium dens in Chinatown. But it was Charlie Lucky who introduced Arnold to the dope game. Charlie had been a small-time dealer for years. In fact, he took his first pinch for drugs when he was still a teenager. Back then, opium and cocaine were encouraged by doctors as cure-alls. But by the mid-20s, New York had the biggest population of heroin addicts in the world. In 1914, the Harrison Act went into effect, making the sale of narcotics illegal. By 1923, a $2,000 investment in heroin would bring back $300,000. With relatively no competition in the dope game, Arnold set out to corner the market. By 1925, Arnold was all in. He had invested a lot of money in the heroin. At first, it was a sideline, and now it was his main moneymaker. His influence in the underworld had started to wane. He no longer had the bond scheme. He retired from bootlegging. He had major competition in bookmaking, and he was no longer operating gambling houses. And for the first time in a long while, his bankroll wasn't the biggest in New York. Former underlings like Waxy Gordon and Big Bill Dwyer had long since surpassed him. Dope was his way back to the top. He set up a drug network and imported pure heroin from Germany. Now, I did a whole video on AR, the drug lord. I'm going to leave the link in the video. Go check it out. It's a more extensive story on the whole drug operation of Arnold Rothstein. All right, but to make the long story short, Arnold would bring in dope by the ton, and he would buy the whole lot. And he used Legs Diamond as his man in distribution. Some of his best customers were Charlie Lucky, Waxy Gordon, and King Solomon from Boston. In 1925, AR sent his friend Sick Thatcher, a user himself, but was one of AR's closest pals, to Asia to establish contacts there. Sick visited China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, and was able to establish connections. A year later, Arnold sent George Uffner to Asia. Uffner would build relationships that would last well after AR's death. Uffner would be the go-to dope guy for Charlie Lucky, Lepke, and Frank Costello. In 1926, AR bought an importing house called Valentine's. Valentine's was a well-established importer of Asian goods. They had been at it so long that custom agents would give a cursory inspection to the goods coming into them. AR used this to bring his stuff in from China. In 1925, the relationship between Arnold Rothstein and Legs Diamond began to deteriorate. Legs was one of those people who was hated by everyone, but no one would touch him because of his relationship with Arnold. Then the Diamond Gang hijacked several of Big Bill Dwyer's booze shipments. At first, out of respect for Arnold, Dwyer only made threats. But if it happened again, he would not be so forgiving. When Legs did it again, Dwyer let Arnold know that he was going to kill him, and he didn't care if Arnold was on board or not. Arnold reluctantly agreed to step away from Legs. On July 1st, 1925, Legs Diamond was driving down 5th Avenue near 106th Street at around 4:30 a.m. when a car containing 4 men pulled alongside and shots rang out. One of the men fired a shotgun, the other fired a pistol in the Legs' car. Legs slammed on the brakes and the shooter's car kept going. Luckily for Legs, he was in front of a hospital. He was taken and seen by the doctors. His scalp was peppered with birdshot and he had a slug from a .38 embedded in his ankle and 64 lacerations from shattered glass. He would pull through. Legs had a knack for eating bullets and surviving until he didn't. But that's for another video. By 1927, Arnold was no longer the big bankroll, but he was still the fixer and the brain. The man you came to see if you needed something taken care of. Even though Arnold was not the biggest gangster, he still cornered the market and political pool, especially with Tammany Hall. He helped Jimmy Hines get elected as mayor in 1926. The outgoing mayor, John F. Harlan, said that Rothstein was the reason he lost. He had great relationships with several judges. Many of those he helped get elected. Now, organized crime cannot work without politicians being on board, and Arnold was the common link between the two worlds. It was Arnold that Joe Masseria came to see to get a license to carry. Arnold used an upstate judge to get Joe a permit to carry legally in the entire state of New York. Arnold understood power, and he understood that the gangsters now had all the power. Politicians needed them more than ever, and they were now in a position to dictate. He saw the same thing with the unions. For years, the union racket was the same old story. Unions went on strike, bosses brought in scabs, and they fought. Both sides would reach out to gangsters to fight for them, and the gangsters got paid for ending or settling the strike. Arnold saw it different. Arnold saw that the unions and management could be infiltrated and corrupted. And instead of ending strikes by busting heads for a quick payoff, they could prolong the strike and get paid by both sides. So what if the average Joe lost a couple of weeks of pay? One of Arnold's former toughs, Louis Lepke, and his partner Gora Shapiro would take this blueprint and go on to become the kings of the garment district. By 1928, you could find Arnold Rothstein holding court at Lindy's at Broadway and 50th Street. Every night when he came in, he was handed his messages from the owner. He made phone calls and had meetings at his table in the back in hushed tones. He would loan people money for business ventures, legal and illegal. He would help a cop get a promotion and even finance the Broadway play or two. He would leave Lindy's and arrive home at around 5 or 6 in the morning, where he would indulge in his only personal pleasure, milk and cake. Now, Arnold was really addicted to this combination, so much that by now, all of his teeth had rotted or had been removed, and he wore full dentures. His relationship with his wife, Carolyn, at this point was almost businesslike. It was a childless marriage, and Arnold was distant. He still treated her well and brought her anything she wanted, but they didn't share the same bed and barely saw each other. Sometime in the mid-20s, Arnold began a secret relationship with Siegfried Follies dancer Bobby Winthrop. The two began to spend a lot of time together, and Carolyn found out. She threatened Arnold with divorce if he didn't break it off, and he did. He gave Bobby between $100,000 and $300,000, sources vary, as a parting gift. Bobby truly loved Arnold, but understood that he was married and accepted the deal. A few months later, he went to see her and said that he needed the cash back for a while, just as a loan. All his money was tied up in investments, and he needed it. Weeks went by, and Arnold had still not paid her back. She would call, and he would give her excuses. Eventually, he stopped responding to her calls and her requests for the money, until he told her that he was not going to return the money. On September 5th, 1927, Bobby Winthrop will be found dead in her home after apparently taking her own life. Carolyn would later ask Arnold for a divorce. Arnold told her that he would give her $2,000 a month until or unless she got married again, and then he would give her $15,000 a year. She left for Europe and told Arnold that when she got back, she would consult a lawyer. While Carolyn was in Europe, Arnold would start another romance with a young dancer named Inez Norton. With Inez, he was more public, and he took her to places he wouldn't dare take anyone before Carolyn wanted out. For the first time in his life, Arnold began to lose more than he won. He still won big on boxing matches and horse races, but every time he did, people were suspicious. The ghost of him fixing the 1919 World Series still loomed. But he was strapped for cash. He had been reinvesting his profits from the drug game back into more drugs. During the racing season, he lost $300,000 at Saratoga and was slow to pay off his debts. Other people were after him too. One night when he came home to his apartment building, the front door was locked. Arnold rang the bell when no one came. When he peeked through the window, he noticed the doorman lying on the couch in the lobby. It seemed like his hands were bound and AR took off. But when he finally came back a half an hour later, everything was normal. Around the same time, a car full of men snatched the man from in front of AR's building. They drove a few blocks before realizing that the guy only looked like AR, but was not AR. Arnold hired a thick-necked thug named Fats Walsh to guard his body. In September of 28, Arnold was looking to get some of his money back. He bet $400,000 that Herbert Hoover would win the presidency over Al Smith, and Franklin D. Roosevelt would beat Albert Oettinger in New York's race for governor. On September 8th, Arnold Rothstein attended a card game at 7th Avenue and 54th Street. The game was a floating poker game run by George McManus. The game started off with pots in the hundreds, but Arnold pushed the game into the thousands. Arnold began to lose from the beginning. He gave his markers scraps of paper with his initials and the amount that he owed to the winners. As the night turned into day, Arnold got deeper into the hole. The others wanted to quit, but Arnold insisted that they continue. But his luck got no better. By the morning of the 10th, Arnold's losses were somewhere over $300,000. None of the players were worried. He was Arnold Rothstein, the big bankroll. He was good for it. But as the days went by, Arnold still had not paid his debts. George McManus was patient at first, but when Arnold began going around saying that the game was fixed, McManus became infuriated. His honor was at stake. If players thought that his game was fixed, he was done for in this business. After a few weeks, McManus sent tough Willie McCabe to go and press Arnold for the dough. Arnold was at Lindy's talking to a friend when McCabe came in and went up to him. "I want the money that you owe George McManus now." Arnold looked down and saw that McCabe had his hand in his pocket. He told him, "I've dealt with tougher men than you. If you ever come near me again, I'll spit in your eye and send you running out of town. Now get out of here." McCabe stood stunned for a second before shaking his head and walking out. Arnold knew that he had to pay. He told his friends that he would pay, but he said that he was going to pay them when he was ready. When Carolyn returned from Europe the last week of October, Arnold asked her if she changed her mind, and she said no. So a few days later, they went to a lawyer, and he drew up divorce papers. Carolyn could see that Arnold was not doing well. His skin was paler than usual, and his eyes were sunken in. She asked him what was wrong, and he said nothing much. "I owe some men some money. It'll be all right." He wasn't in fear for his life, especially when he owed so much money. You can't collect from a corpse. And besides, the election was a few days away, and he was looking at making $750,000 if Hoover and Roosevelt won. He would have the money for them then. But if he lost, he would be in the hole for $1.2 million. On the morning of November 4th, 1928, Arnold Rothstein got up and left his hotel. He headed for his office and went over all the bets he had spread out throughout the country. Later, he picked up Inez Norton. They went to dinner where she said later that he was his usual self. At around 9 p.m., Arnold made his way to Lindy's. He took his usual seat in the back with his pal Jimmy Meehan, whose apartment the McManus game had taken place. At 10:12 p.m., Arnold was again called to the phone. He spoke for a few minutes before hanging up and going outside with Meehan. "McManus wants to see me at the Park Central," he said. Then he handed Meehan his pistol and said, "Keep this for me. I'll be right back." He turned and walked up 7th Avenue to the Park Central. Perhaps Arnold thought that George just wanted to talk. Maybe he figured that he could talk his way into getting the price lowered. But George McManus was beyond talking, and he had been drinking all day, and George was an angry drunk. And when Arnold arrived at the hotel, he went up to room 349. Now, only George McManus and Arnold Rothstein knows what happened next. But a few minutes after Arnold Rothstein entered the room, shots rang out. George McManus shot Arnold once, right beneath his waist on his right side. George fled the room, and Arnold made his way down the back stairs. He was found by a hotel employee near the employee's entrance, holding his belly. "I'm shot. Call a cab." The employee brought back a police officer. Arnold was rushed to the Polyclinic Hospital in critical condition. Although Arnold refused to name the person who shot him, the police quickly found out that Arnold was shot in room 349, which was rented to a man named George Richards. When shown a picture of George McManus, a maid identified him as the man in the room. An overcoat with his name written on the inside was found when they went into the room. When word got back to Lindy's that Arnold had been shot, Fatty Walsh called Carolyn and told her there was an accident. He took Arnold's car and picked her up and took her to the hospital. When she arrived, Arnold had just come out of surgery and was unconscious. The doctor told her to go home and rest. When she returned, he was awake. He told her that he wanted to go home, and he asked her, "Are you still going to divorce me?" She said never, and then he slipped back into a coma. She was taken to an empty room down the hall where she could rest. While she was sleeping, several people came to see Arnold. One of them was Inez Norton. In his half-sleep state, her and Maurice Cantor, one of Arnold's friends, assigned Arnold's ex to a will that left Inez all of his money. Carolyn came back to see him once more, and again, he wanted to go home. This time, the pain was too much to get the words out, so the doctors gave him a shot, and again he went back to sleep. He would never awake. Arnold would hold on until Election Day morning, but he died before knowing the winner of the election. Both Hoover and Roosevelt were victorious. Arnold was buried the next day. The funeral was attended by some of the most powerful men in New York City. Many of them owed their jobs to Arnold. George McManus would be on the run for several weeks before turning himself in. After a long trial, he was acquitted by Judge C. Knott. Inez would present the new will, claiming that Arnold left her everything, but Carolyn sued and won. Louis Lepke took over Arnold's drug connections in Europe. Frank Costello replaced Arnold as the man to see to put the fix in. Charlie Lucky would take Arnold's idea of a national crime syndicate and make it a reality. Writer Damon Runyon, who was present in many nights at Lindy's observing Arnold, would base his story, Guys and Dolls, on him. F. Scott Fitzgerald had a character in his book, The Great Gatsby, who, like Arnold, was the man who fixed the World Series. Fats Walsh will be shot to death in Florida a few months later by a friend who had enough of his teasing. At the time of his death, Arnold was waiting on several $1 million worth of heroin to come in from Europe. And that, my friends, is the skinny on Arnold Rothstein. I hope you guys enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed telling it. And I hope you learned some things that you didn't know. So listen, we're really getting close to 30,000 subs. So make sure you bump off that subscribe button if you haven't already so we can reach that goal. Ring that bell, set it for all notifications, break that thumb. You guys know all the rest. To all the members and subscribers and patrons, thank you. I couldn't do this without you. All right, so stay tuned. I have another episode that I wanted to do a while ago, but now I have a lot of good information on it. So I'm excited to do the best video on this guy coming up. All right, so this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I see yous in the funnies.